I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would say these words out loud. But here I am, 53 years old, standing in my kitchen at dawn, watching the sunrise through tears I've been holding back for years. My name is Margaret, and this is the story of how one terrible night became the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. It started like any other evening. I was making dinner, the same spaghetti carbonara I'd been making every Thursday for the past 28 years. The kitchen smelled of garlic and bacon, comforting and familiar. I heard the front door slam, and I knew immediately what kind of mood he was in. My son David had that particular way of entering the house that told me everything I needed to know about his day. David was 31 years old and still living at home. After his divorce 3 years ago, he'd moved back into his childhood bedroom, and what was supposed to be a temporary arrangement had become permanent. I told myself I was helping him get back on his feet. I told myself that's what mothers do. But the truth was more complicated than that, and I knew it deep down in places I didn't like to examine too closely. He walked into the kitchen without greeting me, opened the refrigerator and stared into it like he was looking for answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. I kept stirring the pasta, keeping my voice light and cheerful in that way I'd perfected over the years. "Dinner will be ready in about 10 minutes, honey. How was your day?" He slammed the refrigerator door. "Do we have any beer?" "I didn't pick any up this week. I thought maybe we could try to cut back a little." "You thought," he interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You thought. That's the problem, Mom. You're always thinking, always managing, always trying to control everything." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, that combination of anxiety and hurt that had become my constant companion. "I'm not trying to control anything, David. I just thought—" "There you go again with the thinking," he said, moving closer to where I stood at the stove. "You know what? I'm tired of this. I'm tired of living in this house where I can't even get a cold beer after a hard day at work." The work he was referring to was a part-time job at a warehouse, 3 days a week, which I'd helped him get through a friend of mine. The other 4 days he spent mostly in his room, playing video games or scrolling through his phone. But I didn't say any of that. I'd learned not to say a lot of things. "I can run to the store real quick," I offered, turning down the heat under the pasta. "It'll only take 15 minutes. "Forget it," he muttered. But he didn't move away. He stood there, radiating anger, and I could smell the beer on his breath already. He'd clearly stopped somewhere before coming home. "You know what your problem is, Mom? You never let Dad be a man. You always had to have everything your way. That's why he left." The mention of my ex-husband was like a slap. Richard had left 12 years ago for a woman he'd met at his accounting firm. The divorce had been messy and painful, and David had taken his father's side, even though Richard barely maintained contact with him after the first year. "David, that's not fair. Your father and I had problems that had nothing to do with—" "Everything had to do with you." His voice was rising now, and I saw the vein in his temple throbbing the way it did when he was really worked up. "You suffocated him just like you suffocate me. Do you know what it's like living here? Do you know what my friends say when I tell them I'm still living with my mother at 31? I turned off the stove completely, my hands shaking slightly. "You're welcome to find your own place anytime, David. You know that. I've never asked you to stay." "Right. Because I can afford my own place on what that joke of a job pays. The job you got me, by the way. The job where I have to work with a bunch of losers who are going nowhere in life." "Then find something better," I said. And I heard the edge in my own voice. "You have a college degree. You have skills. But you have to actually look, David. You have to put in the effort." That was the wrong thing to say. I knew it the moment the words left my mouth. I saw something shift in his face, something dark and dangerous that I'd been seeing more and more frequently over the past few months. "Effort?" He stepped closer, invading my space in a way that made my heart race. "You want to talk to me about effort? I put in 4 years at that company before Sarah decided she wanted a divorce. 4 years of climbing the ladder, making something of myself, and then it all fell apart. And whose fault was that?" "David, your divorce wasn't anyone's fault. These things happen." "It was her fault." He was shouting now, his face inches from mine. "She couldn't handle being married to someone who was actually going somewhere. She was jealous of my success, just like you were jealous of Dad's success." I took a step back, but I was already against the counter. There was nowhere else to go. "I think we should talk about this when you're calmer. Why don't you go to your room and—" "Don't tell me what to do!" His hand shot out, and for a moment I thought he was going to grab me, but instead he swept his arm across the counter, sending the bowl of salad I'd prepared flying. It hit the floor with a crash, lettuce and tomatoes scattering across the tile. "I'm so sick of you telling me what to do." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't the first time David had lost his temper, but something about this felt different. There was a wildness in his eyes that scared me in a way I hadn't been scared before. "David, please," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Let's just calm down and talk about this." "I don't want to calm down." He kicked at the salad bowl, sending it skittering across the floor. "I don't want to talk. I want you to stop treating me like I'm still a child. I want you to stop judging every decision I make. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm a disappointment." "I don't think you're a disappointment," I said. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Had I been showing him that? Had my attempts to help him been coming across as criticism? "You're a liar," he said, and his voice was suddenly quiet, which was somehow more frightening than the shouting. "I can see it in your face every single day. You're disappointed that I'm not Dad. You're disappointed that I'm not some successful businessman with a perfect wife and 2.5 kids. You're disappointed that I needed to move back home." "That's not true, David. I love you. I just want you to be happy." "Happy?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How can I be happy when you're constantly hovering over me, constantly trying to fix me like I'm some broken thing that needs to be repaired?" I didn't know what to say to that. Maybe there was some truth in it. Maybe I had been trying too hard to help, to guide, to protect. But isn't that what mothers do? Don't we want to shield our children from pain, from failure, from the harsh realities of life? "I'm sorry if I've made you feel that way," I said carefully. "That was never my intention. I just wanted to support you through a difficult time." "Support?" He spat the word like it was poison. "Is that what you call it? Constantly asking me if I've applied for jobs? Constantly questioning how I spend my time? Constantly making little comments about my appearance or my habits?" "I didn't realize I was doing that," I said, and I felt tears starting to form. "I'm sorry, David. I really am." For a moment, I thought the apology might diffuse the situation. I thought maybe we could clean up the salad, sit down, and have a real conversation about what was going on. But I was wrong. "Your apologies don't mean anything," he said, moving even closer. "You know why? Because you'll just keep doing it. You can't help yourself. You're a controller. It's who you are." "That's not who I am," I said. But my voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, it is." He was shouting again, and I could feel his breath on my face. "And I'm done with it. I'm done with living in this house where I can't breathe. I'm done with your constant judgment. I'm done with everything." What happened next felt like it was in slow motion and lightning fast at the same time. His hand came up, and I thought he was going to point at me, to gesture to emphasize his words. But instead, his open palm connected with the side of my face with a force that sent me stumbling sideways. The pain was immediate and shocking. Not just the physical pain, though that was real enough, but the emotional pain of realizing that my son, the baby I had nursed and rocked and sang to sleep, the child I had protected and defended and loved with every fiber of my being, had just hit me. I caught myself on the counter, my hand going to my face, which was already starting to burn and throb. I looked at him, and what I saw in his face was almost worse than the slap itself. There was shock there, yes, but also something that looked almost like satisfaction, like some part of him had wanted to do that for a long time. "David," I said, and my voice was shaking now. "You hit me." For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stood there, staring at each other, and I could see the reality of what he'd done starting to sink in. His face went pale, and he took a step back. He started, but then he stopped. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say it was an accident. He just turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs, heard his bedroom door slam, and then the house was silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. My face was throbbing, and when I finally made myself walk to the bathroom and look in the mirror, I could see the red mark of his hand across my cheek. It would be a bruise by morning. I sat down on the closed toilet seat and let myself cry. Not loud, dramatic crying, but quiet tears that ran down my face and dripped onto my hands, which I'd folded in my lap. I cried for the relationship I'd thought we had, I cried for the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers. I cried for the years I'd spent trying to be the perfect mother, only to end up here, in a bathroom, nursing a bruised face and a shattered heart. Eventually, I got up and went back to the kitchen. The salad was still all over the floor and the pasta had gone cold on the stove. I cleaned it all up, moving mechanically, not really thinking about what I was doing. Then I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. I kept waiting for David to come back downstairs. I kept expecting him to appear in the doorway, contrite and apologetic, ready to talk about what had happened. But the hours passed, and he never came. Around 10 o'clock, I heard his bedroom door open, heard him go to the bathroom, and then heard his door close again. The house fell silent. I finally went to bed around midnight, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over in my mind. I tried to figure out where it had gone wrong. Had I said something that triggered him? Could I have handled it differently? Should I have seen this coming? But even as I asked myself these questions, another voice in my head, quieter but more insistent, was saying something else. This isn't your fault. You didn't deserve that. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. At some point in the early morning hours, I must have dozed off, because I woke with a start to the sound of birds chirping outside my window. The room was filled with that particular quality of light that comes just before sunrise. I looked at my phone. It was 5:45 in the morning. I got up and looked at myself in the mirror. The bruise had come in overnight, a dark purple shadow across my left cheek and jaw. I touched it gently, and it hurt. The physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my chest, though. That was a different kind of hurt altogether. I put on a robe and went downstairs. Everything was clean from my late-night cleaning session. If you didn't count the bruise on my face, you'd never know anything had happened here last night. But something had happened. Something had fundamentally changed, and I knew in my bones that I couldn't pretend otherwise. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table as the sun came up, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to just forget about it, to write it off as a one-time thing, an aberration brought on by stress and alcohol. But I knew that would be a mistake. I knew that if I let this slide, if I didn't address it, it would happen again. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. And maybe next time it would be worse. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, I heard movement upstairs. David's bedroom door opened, and I heard his footsteps in the hallway. They paused at the top of the stairs, and I imagined him standing there, trying to decide whether to come down or go back to his room. The footsteps started down the stairs. Slow, hesitant footsteps, not the heavy, angry stomping of last night. I sat up straighter in my chair, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug, and waited. He appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, and I saw him freeze when he saw me sitting there. His eyes went immediately to the bruise on my face, and I saw him flinch. Good, I thought. He should flinch. He should see what he did. "Mom," he said, and his voice was rough with sleep and something else. "Shame, maybe. I didn't think you'd be up." "I've been up most of the night," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, even though my heart was racing. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, not quite meeting my eyes. "About last night." "You hit me," I said, cutting him off. "You hit your mother in her own kitchen." "I know," he said, looking at the floor. "I was drunk and angry, and I lost control. It won't happen again." "You're right," I said. "It won't happen again, because you're not going to be living here anymore." His head snapped up, and I saw genuine shock in his face. "What?" "You heard me." I set my coffee mug down carefully, surprised at how steady my hands were. "I want you to pack your things and leave. Today." "Mom, come on. I said it won't happen again. I'm sorry, okay? I'm really sorry." "I'm sure you are," I said. "But sorry isn't enough. What you did last night crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." "Where am I supposed to go?" He moved into the kitchen now, his hands spread in a pleading gesture. "I don't have anywhere to go. I can't afford my own place." "That's not my problem anymore, David. You're a grown man. You'll figure it out." "So you're just going to throw me out on the street? Your own son?" "I'm not throwing you out on the street. I'm telling you that you can't live here anymore. There's a difference." He sat down at the table across from me, and I could see him trying to gather his thoughts, trying to find the right words to change my mind. "Mom, listen. I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong. But you have to understand. I've been under a lot of stress. the divorce, the job situation, everything. I just snapped. It was a one-time thing. David, do you remember when you were 15 and you came home drunk for the first time? He looked confused by the change in subject. What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. Yeah, I remember. You and Dad grounded me for a month. Do you remember what I told you that night? He shook his head. I told you that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. You showed me that night that you had a problem with impulse control and poor decision-making. And I was right. Your whole life has been a series of impulsive decisions and poor choices. But I kept making excuses for you. I kept bailing you out. I kept thinking that if I just loved you enough, helped you enough, you'd change. I can change, he said quickly. I will change. Just give me another chance. Last night, you showed me who you are, I continued, as if he hadn't spoken. You showed me that you're someone who solves problems with violence, someone who takes his frustrations out on people who can't fight back. And I'm choosing to believe you. That's not who I am. His voice was rising again, and I saw a flash of that same anger from last night cross his face. Then he caught himself, took a breath, forced his voice back down. That's not who I am, Mom. You know me better than that. Do I? I asked. Because the David I thought I knew would never have hit his mother. The David I thought I knew would have come downstairs last night to apologize, not hidden in his room until morning. He was silent for a moment, and I could see him struggling with that. Finally, he said, I was ashamed. I didn't know what to say. And yet, even now, you haven't actually apologized. You've explained. You've made excuses. You've told me why I should overlook it. But you haven't actually said you're sorry for hurting me. I am sorry, he said, but it sounded hollow even to me. I'm sorry I hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, David. And more importantly, you wanted to in that moment. I saw it in your face. Some part of you wanted to hit me. He didn't deny it. He couldn't, because we both knew it was true. We sat there in silence for what felt like a long time. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was going to be a beautiful day. I need you to pack your things and leave today, I said finally. I'll give you until 6 o'clock tonight. That gives you 12 hours to figure out where you're going to go. Mom, please. This isn't a negotiation, David. This is what's going to happen. You can call your father, you can call your friends, you can check into a hotel, I don't care, but you can't stay here. What if I refuse? There was a hint of defiance in his voice now, a spark of that anger trying to reignite. Then I'll call the police and have you removed, and I'll file a report about what happened last night. That stopped him cold. You'd really do that? You'd really call the cops on your own son? Yes, I said, and I meant it. I would. Because what you did was assault, David. It's a crime. And I'm not going to pretend it isn't. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe I'd never let him see this side of me. The side that had boundaries and consequences and self-respect. I can't believe you're doing this, he said, standing up from the table. I can't believe you're throwing away our relationship over one mistake. I'm not throwing away our relationship, I said. You did that when you hit me. I'm just acknowledging the reality of what happened. He left the kitchen without another word, and I heard him thundering back up the stairs. A few minutes later, I heard him on the phone in his room, his voice loud and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, drinking my coffee and watching the day brighten outside the window. I felt strangely calm, like I'd finally made a decision I should have made a long time ago. Not about last night specifically, but about enabling David's behavior. About letting him use me as a crutch. About accepting treatment that I never would have tolerated from anyone else. Over the next few hours, I heard David moving around upstairs. Drawers opening and closing, closet doors sliding, the occasional thump of something heavy being dropped. He was packing, at least. Part of me had worried he would just refuse, that he would dare me to follow through on my threat to call the police. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was my sister, Linda. Linda and I had always been close, and she knew about David's situation, though I'd never told her about the extent of his anger issues. I'd been too embarrassed, too ashamed of failing as a mother. Hey, Margaret, she said when I answered. I haven't heard from you in a few days. Just wanted to check in. How are things? I started to give my usual answer, the one I always gave. Fine. Everything's fine. just busy. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the bruise on my face. Maybe it was the sound of David slamming things around upstairs. Maybe it was just that I was tired of lying. Actually, Linda, things aren't fine, I said. David hit me last night. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, he what? We got into an argument and he slapped me across the face. I have a bruise. Oh my God, Margaret, are you okay? Did you call the police? I'm okay, and no, I didn't call the police, but I told him he has to move out. Today. Good, Linda said firmly. Good for you. That's exactly what you should have done. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting, I admitted. I keep thinking maybe I should give him another chance. You're not overreacting, Linda said. Margaret, listen to me. What he did is not okay. It doesn't matter that he's your son. It doesn't matter that he's going through a hard time. Nothing excuses him putting his hands on you. Hearing her say it out loud, hearing someone else validate what I already knew in my heart, made something inside me settle. You're right, I said. I know you're right. Do you want me to come over? I can be there in an hour. No, that's okay. I think I need to do this on my own. Okay, but I'm just a phone call away. And Margaret, I'm proud of you. I know this can't be easy. After we hung up, I felt stronger somehow. Like having someone else acknowledge the reality of the situation made it more real, more valid. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was simply standing up for myself in a way I should have done years ago. The morning dragged on. I tried to keep myself busy, doing laundry and cleaning things that didn't really need cleaning. It was hard to focus on anything with the sound of David moving around upstairs, the weight of what was happening pressing down on me. Around noon, David came downstairs with 2 large duffel bags. He set them down by the front door and came into the living room where I was folding towels. I called Dad, he said. He said I could stay with him for a while. I was surprised Richard had agreed to that. He and his wife had a nice life set up, and I couldn't imagine they were thrilled about the prospect of a 31-year-old houseguest. But I didn't say any of that. That's good, I said. I'm glad you have somewhere to go. He's going to be here around 5 to pick me up. He wants to talk to you. That's fine. David stood there for a moment, like he was waiting for something. For me to change my mind, maybe. For me to break down and tell him he didn't really have to go. But I kept folding towels, keeping my hands busy so he wouldn't see how much they wanted to shake. I really am sorry, Mom, he said finally. I know you don't believe me, but I am. I set down the towel I was folding and looked at him. Really looked at him. At 31, he still had the face of the boy I'd raised, but there was something hard around his eyes now, something bitter in the set of his mouth. When had that happened? When had my sweet little boy become this angry, resentful man? I do believe you're sorry, I said. I believe you're sorry about the consequences. I believe you're sorry that you have to leave, but I don't think you're sorry for what you did. Not really, because if you were, you would have come downstairs last night to check on me. You would have been the one to bring up leaving, not me. You would have taken responsibility instead of making excuses. That's not fair, he said. You don't know what I was feeling last night. You're right, I don't. Because you didn't tell me. You hid in your room like a child who broke something and hoped it would just fix itself. He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, then closed it again. What could he say? We both knew I was right. I'm going to finish packing, he said finally, and went back upstairs. The afternoon passed in a strange, suspended kind of way. I kept expecting to feel something more dramatic, rage, or grief, or relief. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the walking on eggshells, tired of making excuses and enabling bad behavior in the name of love. At exactly 5 o'clock, I heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window and saw Richard's silver sedan in the driveway. He got out, looking older than I remembered, his hair thinner and grayer. He saw me in the window and gave a little wave. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. I opened the front door before he could knock. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, 2 people who had once promised to love each other forever, and who now were connected only by the troubled adult child we'd raised together. Margaret, he said, David told me what happened. Did he tell you he hit me? I asked, turning my face so he could see the bruise clearly. Richard's face went pale and I saw his jaw tighten. He said you had an argument and things got out of hand. That's one way to put it. Another way would be to say that he assaulted me in my own kitchen. Jesus, Richard muttered, running a hand over his face. I had no idea things had gotten that bad. Well, now you know. David appeared at the top of the stairs with the last of his bags. He came down slowly, not looking at either of us, and carried his things out to Richard's car. Richard helped him load everything into the trunk, and then they both came back to the doorway where I was still standing. I'm going to have a serious talk with him, Richard said quietly, so David couldn't hear. This isn't acceptable. You know that, right? What he did isn't acceptable. I know, I said, that's why he can't live here anymore. I think you're doing the right thing. I wish I'd been more involved. Maybe this wouldn't have… Don't, I interrupted. We both made mistakes with him, lots of them, but he's an adult now. His choices are his own. Richard nodded, looking tired and old. If you want to press charges, I'll understand. I'll even support it. I was surprised by that. I don't think I will, I said. But I reserve the right to change my mind if he ever tries to contact me in an aggressive way. Fair enough. David had been standing by the car, but now he walked back toward the house. He stopped a few feet away from me, his hands shoved in his pockets. I guess this is it, he said. I guess so. You're really not going to forgive me? David, forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust is the issue. You violated my trust in the most fundamental way. Even if I forgave you tomorrow, which I'm not ready to do, I still wouldn't feel safe living with you. And I deserve to feel safe in my own home. He didn't have an answer for that. After a moment, he turned and got into his father's car. Richard gave me one last look, something like sympathy in his eyes, and then he got in too. I watched them drive away, standing in the doorway until the car disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, finally letting myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son was gone. The house was mine again. And I had no idea what came next. The first week after David left was strange. The house felt empty in a way it hadn't since before he moved back in. But it was a different kind of empty than I'd expected. It wasn't lonely exactly. It was more like the house was taking a deep breath, expanding into the space that had been compressed by all that anger and tension. I went to work at the library where I'd been employed for the past 15 years. I told my closest friend there, Patricia, what had happened. She hugged me and told me I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt shaky and uncertain, like I'd jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure if I'd land on solid ground or keep falling forever. Patricia and I had worked together for over a decade, shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed. She knew about David's situation, knew about the divorce years ago, knew the broad strokes of my life. But I'd never told her how bad things had gotten at home. I'd been too ashamed, too worried about being judged as a bad mother. Margaret, she said that first day back at work, pulling me into the break room during lunch. I need you to understand something. What you did wasn't cruel. It was necessary. You know how many women I see come in here with bruises they try to hide. How many make excuses for the men in their lives who hurt them. But he's my son, I said, my voice breaking on that last word. And that makes it even harder, I know. But it doesn't make it less important. You taught him the most important lesson he'll ever learn. You taught him that actions have consequences, even when you love someone. Those words stayed with me through those first difficult days. Every time I walked into the empty house, every time I cooked dinner for one, every time I woke up in the middle of the night wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, I repeated Patricia's words to myself like a mantra. Actions have consequences, even when you love someone. The second week was harder than the first. The shock had worn off, and the reality of what I'd done started to sink in. I'd sent my only child away. What if he never forgave me? What if this was the thing that permanently destroyed our relationship? What if he spiraled downward without my support and it was all my fault? I called Linda one night, sobbing so hard I could barely get the words out. What if I was wrong? What if I should have given him another chance? What if he needed me and I abandoned him? Linda let me cry for a while before she spoke. Margaret, do you remember when David was 7 and he broke Mrs. Patterson's window playing baseball in the front yard? Of course I remember. We made him apologize and pay for the replacement out of his allowance. And do you remember how he tried to blame it on his friend Tommy? How he said Tommy was the one who hit the ball? Yes, but what does that have to do with… You didn't let him get away with lying then, Linda interrupted. Even though it would have been easier. Even though Mrs. Patterson said it was fine, that accidents happen. You made him take responsibility. This is the same thing, Margaret. Just bigger. Much bigger. But he was 7 then. He's 31 now. Shouldn't he be past this by now? Yes, he should, but he's not. And whose fault is that? Not yours. You've given him every opportunity to grow up. He's the one who hasn't taken them. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about all the times over the years when I'd made excuses for David. When he got fired from his first job out of college because he'd called in sick too many times, I told myself he was just adjusting to the working world. When he'd maxed out his credit cards and I'd helped him pay them off, I'd told myself everyone makes financial mistakes when they're young. When Sarah had divorced him and he'd painted her as the villain, I'd believed his version without question. How many chances had I already given him? How many times had I smoothed over his problems, bailed him out, made it easier for him to avoid facing his own failures? Maybe the real question wasn't whether I should have given him another chance. Maybe the real question was why I'd given him so many chances already. But slowly, things started to shift. Little things at first. I realized I wasn't tensing up every time I heard the front door open, because there was no one to come home in a bad mood. I started making dinners I liked instead of the heavy, meat and potatoes meals David preferred. I made salmon with lemon and herbs, salads with arugula and goat cheese, vegetarian pasta dishes that David would have complained about. One evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to watch a documentary about ocean life. It was something I'd wanted to watch for weeks, but I'd never turned it on because David would have rolled his eyes and made comments about how boring it was. Now, I watched it in peace, fascinated by the footage of deep-sea creatures, and realized I was smiling. The 3rd week after David left, I joined a book club that met on Thursday evenings. It was something Patricia had been inviting me to for years, but I'd always said no. Thursday was family dinner night. It had been family dinner night since David was a child, and even though it was just the 2 of us now, even though he usually ate quickly and disappeared to his room, I'd maintained the tradition. The book club met at a small cafe downtown. There were 8 women, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s. They were reading a novel about a woman who left her husband and traveled across Europe alone, finding herself in the process. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm Margaret," I said when it was my turn to introduce myself. "This is my first meeting. I haven't finished the book yet, but I'm working on it." A woman named Diane, who looked to be in her 60s, smiled warmly at me. "Don't worry, we're not going to quiz you. We're just glad you're here. Patricia's been trying to recruit you for years." The discussion that night was lively and engaging. The women had different opinions about the main character's choices, about whether she was brave or selfish, about whether leaving her family behind was justified. I mostly listened, but toward the end of the meeting, I found myself speaking up. "I think sometimes we get so caught up in who we're supposed to be for other people that we forget who we are for ourselves," I said. "And maybe it's not selfish to reclaim that. Maybe it's survival." The room went quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd said too much, revealed too much. But then Diane nodded slowly. "That's beautifully put, Margaret. I think you just summarized the entire book." After the meeting, several of the women invited me to join them for coffee. We sat in a booth at a nearby diner, talking and laughing, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something like this. The last time I'd had friends who weren't connected to David or Richard, who knew me just as Margaret, not as someone's mother or ex-wife. Around this time, I also started seeing a therapist. It was something I'd considered over the years but had never followed through on. There was always some excuse: too expensive, too time-consuming, too self-indulgent. But now, I realized I needed help processing everything that had happened. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her 40s, with a calm, centered presence that immediately put me at ease. In our first session, I told her the whole story. About the marriage that fell apart. About David moving back in. About the years of walking on eggshells. About that night in the kitchen. "How are you feeling about your decision to ask him to leave?" she asked. "Guilty," I admitted. "Scared, relieved, angry, sad. All of it, all at once." "That's completely normal," she said. "You're grieving, not just the loss of having your son in your home, but the loss of the relationship you thought you had with him. Maybe even the loss of the idea of who you thought he was." That hit me hard. The loss of the idea of who I thought he was. She was right. I'd been carrying around this image of David for years, not the angry, resentful man he'd become, but the sweet little boy who used to make me Mother's Day cards and tell me I was the best mom in the world. I'd been grieving that boy for a long time without realizing it. Over the next several sessions, Dr. Chen helped me understand the patterns I'd fallen into. The way I'd enabled David's dependence under the guise of being supportive. The way I'd absorbed his anger and made it my responsibility to manage his emotions. The way I'd confused love with sacrifice, thinking that being a good mother meant giving up everything for my child. Love without boundaries isn't really love, she told me one day. It's enmeshment. It's losing yourself in someone else. And ultimately, it's not good for either person. I started keeping a journal, something Dr. Chen suggested. Every night before bed, I wrote about my day, my feelings, the small victories, and the hard moments. Reading back over those entries now, I can see my own transformation on the page. The way my handwriting became steadier. The way the entries shifted from anxiety and doubt to small moments of joy and discovery. One entry from about a month after David left reads, "Planted tomatoes in the garden today. David always said gardening was a waste of time, but I used to love it before Richard left, before everything became about just surviving. The feeling of dirt under my fingernails, the smell of the earth, the hope of watching something grow. I'd forgotten how much I missed this." About 2 weeks after David left, Linda came over for coffee. We sat in my kitchen, and she kept looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. "What?" I finally asked. "You look different," she said. Lighter somehow. "The bruise is almost gone," I said, touching my cheek where only a faint yellow shadow remained. "That's not what I mean. You look, I don't know, more like yourself. Like the Margaret I remember from before Richard left, before David moved back in." I thought about that. "I think I forgot who I was for a while," I admitted. "I got so caught up in trying to fix David, trying to be the perfect mother, that I lost track of everything else." "Are you going to let him come back?" "No," I said. And I was surprised by how certain I felt about that. Even if he gets his act together, even if he goes to therapy and deals with his anger issues, I don't think I can live with him again. That trust is broken. "Have you heard from him?" "Richard texts me updates occasionally. David got a full-time job at a warehouse. He's seeing a therapist, apparently. Richard insisted on it as a condition of him staying there." "That's good," Linda said. "But it doesn't change what he did." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." The weeks turned into months. Fall came, and with it the beautiful chaos of leaves changing and that particular quality of light that makes everything look golden. I started taking walks in the evening, something I hadn't done in years. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it, the simple pleasure of moving through my neighborhood as the day wound down, watching families eat dinner through lit windows, hearing fragments of conversations and laughter. The evening walks became a ritual. I'd finish dinner, clean up the kitchen, and then head out around 7 o'clock when the worst of the day's heat had passed, but the sun was still golden and warm. My neighborhood was lovely at that time of day. Children played in yards, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Couples sat on porches, holding hands and talking quietly. Dogs barked friendly greetings as I passed. One particular route became my favorite. It took me down Maple Street, past the elementary school where David had gone, then looped around through the park and back up Oak Avenue. The whole circuit took about 45 minutes, just the right amount of time to clear my head and settle my thoughts before the evening stretched out ahead of me. One evening in late October, about 2 months after David had left, I was on one of these walks when I ran into my neighbor Thomas. Thomas was a widower in his late 50s who lived 3 houses down. We'd always been friendly, exchanging pleasantries when we both happened to be getting our mail or working in our yards, but we'd never had a real conversation. He was coming out of his driveway as I walked past, carrying a bag of trash to the curb. When he saw me, his face lit up with a genuine smile. "Margaret," he said, looking pleased to see me. "I've noticed you walking in the evenings. It's nice to see you out and about." "I'm reclaiming my life," I said, and then laughed at how dramatic that sounded. "Sorry, that came out more intense than I meant it." "No, I understand," he said, setting down the trash bag. "After my wife died, it took me a long time to figure out how to live again. To do things for myself instead of always thinking about what she would want or need." There was something in his voice, a kind of gentle understanding, that made me want to keep talking to him. "How long has it been?" I asked. "Since your wife passed, I mean." 3 years this December," he said. "Helen, she had cancer. It was a long fight, and by the end, I think we were both ready for it to be over, as terrible as that sounds. It doesn't sound terrible, I said. It sounds honest. He looked at me for a moment, really looked at me, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. Would you like to walk with me? I was just about to head out myself. I usually go around the block a few times in the evening. Helps me sleep better. I'd like that, I said. We walked together, falling into an easy rhythm. Thomas had a steady, unhurried pace that matched mine perfectly. For the first few minutes, we talked about inconsequential things. The weather, which had been unusually warm for October. The neighborhood association's plan to install new streetlights, which some people loved and others hated. The family that had just moved in 2 streets over, with their 3 young children and energetic golden retriever. But gradually, the conversation deepened. Thomas told me about his wife, about their 35-year marriage, about how they'd met at a college party when they were both 19. He told me about her diagnosis 5 years ago, about the treatments and the hope and the gradual realization that hope wasn't going to be enough. The hardest part wasn't losing her, he said as we walked through the park, our shoes crunching on fallen leaves. I mean, that was hard, don't get me wrong, but the hardest part was figuring out who I was without her. We'd been together since we were kids. I didn't know how to be Thomas without Helen beside me. Have you figured it out? I asked. Who you are without her? I'm getting there, he said. It's a process. Some days are better than others, but I'm learning that it's okay to move forward, that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. Something about the way he said it made my throat tight with emotion. We walked in silence for a while, and it was the comfortable kind of silence, the kind where you don't feel pressure to fill the space with words. What about you? He finally asked. I don't mean to pry, but I know your son moved out recently. I saw the moving truck. I debated how much to tell him. I barely knew this man after all, but there was something about him, something safe and non-judgmental that made me want to be honest. He didn't just move out, I said carefully. I asked him to leave. Oh, Thomas said, and I could tell he was trying to figure out how to respond to that. We had a fight, I continued, the words coming easier now that I'd started. He hit me, and I decided I couldn't live with someone who would do that, even my own child. Thomas stopped walking. We were under a streetlight, and in its glow I could see the shock and concern on his face. Margaret, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I'm getting there, I said, echoing his words from earlier. It's a process. Some days are better than others. He reached out like he was going to touch my arm, then seemed to think better of it and let his hand drop. That took courage, he said. What you did. A lot of people in your situation would have let it go, made excuses, tried to smooth things over. You chose yourself. That's not selfish. That's survival. We started walking again, and I found myself telling him more. About the years of enabling David's behavior. About the divorce from Richard and how it had affected David. About the slow escalation of anger and resentment that had culminated in that night in the kitchen. Thomas listened without interruption, without offering advice or judgment. He just listened, and sometimes that's the most valuable thing someone can do. When we got back to my house, he said, I've really enjoyed talking with you tonight, Margaret. Would you like to do this again sometime? Walk together, I mean. I'd like that very much, I said. How about tomorrow, same time? Tomorrow sounds perfect. And so it became a routine. Every evening, Thomas would meet me at the end of my driveway at 7 o'clock, and we'd walk together. Sometimes we talked about heavy things, about loss and grief and learning to live again. Sometimes we talked about lighter topics, about books we were reading or shows we were watching or memories from our childhoods. I learned that Thomas had been an engineer before he retired, that he loved jazz music and Italian food, that he was terrible at gardening but kept trying anyway. He learned that I worked at the library, that I'd always wanted to learn to play the piano, that I had a weakness for murder mysteries and detective novels. About 3 weeks into our evening walks, Thomas mentioned a new Italian restaurant that had opened downtown. I've been wanting to try it, he said, but eating alone at a restaurant always feels strange to me. Would you maybe want to go with me this weekend? My heart did a little flip, and I realized I was nervous in a way I hadn't been nervous in years. Like a date? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. If you'd like it to be a date, then yes, he said, smiling. If you'd prefer to think of it as 2 friends having dinner, that works too. I thought about it for a moment. Was I ready for this? Was it too soon? But then I thought about what Dr. Chen had said in one of our sessions. You don't have to wait until you feel completely healed to start living again. Sometimes living again is part of the healing. I think I'd like it to be a date, I said. I have book club on Thursday nights, I said. But maybe Friday? Friday would be great. That Friday, we went to the small Italian restaurant downtown. It wasn't a date exactly. Or at least that's what I told myself as I changed my outfit 3 times before finally settling on a simple blue dress and cardigan. Just 2 neighbors having dinner. But it felt like more than that. It felt like a door opening. Like a possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider. The restaurant was intimate and cozy, with warm lighting and soft music playing in the background. A candle flickered on our table, casting dancing shadows across Thomas's face as we looked at our menus. Thomas told me about his wife Helen, who had died of cancer 3 years earlier. He told me about their 35-year marriage, the good parts and the hard parts, and how he was finally starting to feel like he might be ready to move forward instead of just surviving. I told him about Richard and the divorce, about the years I'd spent feeling like I'd failed at the most important job in my life. And then, hesitantly, I told him about David. About the night he hit me, about asking him to leave, about the strange mixture of guilt and relief I'd been feeling ever since. Thomas listened without judgment, without offering advice or platitudes. When I finished, he just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That took courage," he said. "What you did. A lot of people in your situation would have let it go, made excuses, tried to smooth things over. You chose yourself. That's not selfish. That's survival." I felt tears prick at my eyes, and I was grateful for his understanding. Sometimes I wonder if I gave up on him too easily. From what you've told me, you didn't give up on him. You gave up on accepting unacceptable behavior. There's a difference. We saw each other regularly after that. Sometimes for dinner, sometimes for walks, sometimes just for coffee on a Sunday morning. It was easy and comfortable in a way that felt surprising. I'd forgotten what it was like to be with someone who didn't need me to fix them, who didn't see me as a solution to their problems. Christmas came, and I spent it with Linda and her family instead of sitting at home alone waiting for a phone call from David that never came. Richard had texted to let me know that David wouldn't be reaching out, that he'd suggested it might be better to give me space. I appreciated that, even though there was a small part of me that had hoped my son might at least send a text. New Year's Eve, Thomas invited me to a small party at his house. Just a few neighbors and friends, nothing fancy. I almost didn't go, feeling strange about the idea of celebrating when so much in my life still felt unresolved. But Linda convinced me, telling me I deserved to enjoy myself. At midnight, when everyone was hugging and toasting the new year, Thomas kissed me on the cheek and said, "Here's to new beginnings." New beginnings, I echoed, and I realized I actually believed it. In February, on a cold Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work to find David sitting on my front porch. My heart jumped into my throat, and my first instinct was to get back in my car and drive away. But I made myself park in the driveway and walk up to the house. He stood up when he saw me, and I noticed immediately that he looked different. Thinner, but in a healthy way. His hair was cut shorter, and he was wearing clothes that fit properly instead of the baggy sweatshirts and jeans he'd lived in before. But the biggest difference was in his face. The hardness around his eyes was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Hi, Mom," he said, and his voice was different too. Quieter, less defensive. "David," I said, stopping a few feet away from the porch. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know, I should have called first, I'm sorry." There was that word again. Sorry. But this time it sounded different. It sounded like he actually meant it. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. "I wanted to talk to you. I've been going to therapy like Dad insisted, and my therapist thought it might be time for me to try to make amends." "Amends," I repeated. "Can we sit down, please?" I unlocked the front door and led him inside, but I didn't invite him to take off his coat or get comfortable. We sat in the living room, me in my usual chair and him on the edge of the couch, like he understood he was a guest now, not a resident. "I've been thinking a lot about that night," he began, "about what I did to you. And I need you to know that I understand now how wrong it was. Not just the hitting, although that was obviously the worst part, but everything. The way I treated you, the way I took advantage of your kindness and turned it into something to resent." I didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. "My therapist helped me understand that I was using you as a scapegoat for all my own failures. Every time I made a bad decision or things didn't work out the way I wanted, I blamed you instead of taking responsibility myself. And that night, when you tried to set a boundary, I couldn't handle it. Because if I actually had to face my own shortcomings, it would mean admitting that I'd wasted years of my life. Have you? I asked quietly. Wasted years of your life? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Not wasted exactly. But I haven't been living the way I should have been. I've been coasting, expecting things to just work out, expecting people to take care of me. And when they didn't, I got angry instead of asking myself what I could do differently. That's a lot of insight, I said. It's been a hard few months, he admitted. Living with Dad and Karen hasn't been easy. They have rules and expectations. I have to pay rent, I have to do chores, I have to contribute. At first I was angry about it. But then I realized that's what being an adult is supposed to look like. I felt something loosening in my chest, like a fist that had been clenched for months was finally starting to relax. I'm glad you're doing well, David. I'm not here to ask to move back in, he said quickly. I know that's not going to happen. I don't deserve that. But I wanted to tell you face to face that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for hitting you. I'm sorry for treating you like you were the problem. I'm sorry for all the years I took your love for granted. Tears were running down my face now, but I wasn't making any sound. They just fell, silent and steady, as I looked at my son and saw, maybe for the first time in years, glimpses of the person he could be. I appreciate you saying that, I managed to get out. That means a lot. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. I don't even know if you should forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming someone who deserves forgiveness, whether or not I ever get it from you. We sat in silence for a while. Not the heavy, angry silence that used to fill this house, but something softer. Something that felt almost like peace. Can I ask you something? I finally said. Of course. Are you doing this for you or for me? He thought about that for a moment. Honestly, for me. My therapist says that real change has to come from wanting to be better for yourself, not because you want to make someone else happy. But that doesn't mean I don't care about how much I hurt you. It just means I'm finally understanding that I can't control how you feel about me. I can only control who I choose to be. I nodded, feeling something close to pride. This was the kind of thinking I'd hoped he would someday develop, but I'd stopped believing it would ever happen. I'm seeing someone, I said, changing the subject. Thomas, he lives down the street. David smiled, and it looked genuine. That's great, Mom. You deserve to be happy. I've been learning to be happy on my own first, I said. Thomas is just a bonus. That's probably the healthy way to do it, he said. I'm not dating anyone. My therapist suggested I focus on myself for a while before trying to be in a relationship. We talked for another hour. Not about anything particularly deep or meaningful, just catching up. He told me about his job, about the apartment he was looking at renting with a friend from work. I told him about book club and my walks, and the trip Linda and I were planning to take to the coast in the spring. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. Could I maybe call you sometime, just to check in? I thought about it. A few months ago, the answer would have been an automatic no. But something had shifted. Maybe in him, maybe in me, maybe in both of us. Yes, I said. You can call. But David, if I ever feel like you're slipping back into old patterns, I'm going to create distance again. I won't sacrifice my peace of mind or my safety, even for you. I understand, he said, and I wouldn't want you to. After he left, I sat in the quiet house for a long time, processing everything that had happened. I didn't feel magically healed or like all our problems were solved, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years when it came to my son. I felt hope. Spring came, and with it, everything felt new and possible. Linda and I took our trip to the coast, spending a week in a little beach cottage, walking on the sand and talking about everything and nothing. Thomas and I grew closer, moving from friendship towards something that felt more serious, though we were both taking our time. David called once a week, usually on Sunday mornings. We kept the conversations light, and he respected my boundaries. He never pushed for more than I was willing to give. In April, he sent me a card for my birthday with a handwritten note inside that made me cry. It said, "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. I'm learning what it means to be a good man, and I have you to thank for showing me that I needed to learn." In May, David invited me to see his new apartment. I was nervous about going, But I brought Thomas with me for support, and it went better than I'd expected. The apartment was small but clean, and David had clearly put effort into making it a real home. There were plants on the windowsill and actual furniture instead of just beanbags and milk crates. His roommate, a guy named Marcus who worked at the same warehouse, seemed grounded and responsible. Over pizza, Marcus told me that David had been a great roommate, always paying his share on time and doing more than his fair share of the housework. "Your son's a good guy," Marcus said. "He talks about you a lot, about how he's trying to make you proud." I glanced at David, who looked embarrassed but pleased. "I'm working on being proud of myself first," David said. "But yeah, it would be nice to make Mom proud too." "I am proud of you," I said, and I meant it. Not proud of who he had been, but proud of who he was working to become. The anniversary of that terrible night came and went. I thought it would be harder than it was, but mostly I just felt grateful. Grateful that I'd had the strength to set a boundary. Grateful that David had chosen to respect it and work on himself. Grateful for the new life I'd built in the space that had been created. One evening in late June, Thomas and I were sitting on my back porch, watching the fireflies emerge as the sun set. We'd been together for almost 6 months, and it felt easy and right in a way my marriage to Richard never had. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, reaching over to take my hand, "about asking if you might want to take a trip together. Maybe in the fall. There's this place in Vermont I've always wanted to see when the leaves change." "I'd like that," I said, squeezing his hand. "Margaret, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I admire you. The way you handled everything with David, the way you've rebuilt your life. It takes real strength to choose yourself when everyone expects you to keep sacrificing." "I didn't feel strong," I admitted. "I felt terrified. I kept thinking I was making a huge mistake." "But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing what you need to do despite the fear." I thought about that as we sat there in the growing darkness, the fireflies blinking their gentle lights around us. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been brave without realizing it. The story doesn't have a neat, tidy ending. David and I are still rebuilding our relationship, slowly and carefully. Some days are easier than others. There are still moments when I feel the old anger, the old hurt, rising up. And there are moments when I miss the little boy he used to be so much it physically hurts. But I've learned something important over this past year. I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything they do. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let someone face the consequences of their actions. I've learned that I deserve to feel safe and respected, even by my own child. More than that, I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life. At 54, I'm dating someone who treats me with kindness and respect. I have hobbies and friends and interests that have nothing to do with being someone's mother or someone's ex-wife. I wake up in the morning feeling peaceful instead of anxious. Is my relationship with David completely healed? No. Will it ever be what it was when he was a child? Probably not. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're building something better now, something based on mutual respect and realistic expectations instead of idealized notions of what a mother and son should be to each other. The bruise on my face healed within a few weeks. The bruise on my heart has taken longer, and I suspect some part of it will always be there. But I've learned to live with it. I've learned that you can be hurt by someone and still have boundaries. You can love someone and still put yourself first. You can forgive someone eventually while still remembering what they did. That morning, when I woke up at 6 and found David coming down the stairs, I made a choice. I chose to believe what he had shown me the night before. I chose to value my own safety and well-being over his comfort. I chose myself. And it turns out that was exactly the right choice. Not just for me, but for David too. Because it forced him to finally face himself, to do the work he needed to do, to become the person he had the potential to be all along. Justice, I've learned, doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes justice is quiet. Sometimes it's just a mother saying no and meaning it. Sometimes it's the sound of a car driving away, carrying your child to the consequences they've earned. Sometimes justice is reclaiming your kitchen, your home, your life, and refusing to give them back. At 6 in the morning, standing in my kitchen with a bruised face and a breaking heart, I served justice. Not the dramatic, vengeful kind, just the simple, profound kind of justice that says, I matter. My safety matters. My peace matters. And I'm worth fighting for. As the sun rises on another day, I stand in that same kitchen, making coffee and looking forward to whatever comes next. Thomas is coming over for breakfast. Linda and I are planning another trip. David is learning to stand on his own 2 feet. And me? I'm learning that it's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. The person who knows their worth. The person who sets boundaries and keeps them. The person who understands that real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that heals, begins with loving yourself enough to demand respect. That's my story. That's my justice. And every morning when I wake up in my peaceful home, I'm grateful for the courage I found that night. The courage to say enough. The courage to choose myself. The courage to believe that I deserved better. Because I did deserve better, and now finally I have it.